Hi Music 189ers! I hope you are doing very well. If you are watching this video, this means that you have completed the second module for Music 189, and this also means that you're ready to go on to Module 3, and after you complete Module 3, you'll be halfway done with the course. I cannot believe how time is flying this summer term. So this week I have not received too many questions regarding content. There was only one that I would like to address for everybody, so we're all on the same page, and that's regarding the actual topic, drama. What do I mean by drama? By drama, I mean the theatrical art of including and staging some type of narrative. And a narrative includes a plot, a setting, and characters, and provides a multimedia experience for viewers. So I chose the genres of opera and film in order to explore, in particular, audio-visual relationships, but this does not exclude other sensory experiences as well. So you worked hard by this point. You should have completed one activity and a multitude of assignments, including 3 listening guide quizzes and your first musical meaning blog. You also have a discussion regarding your musical meaning blogs. So I'd like to just summarize our 2 primary genres of opera and film music. So let's begin with opera. So I thought it would be really helpful. You started your exploration of opera from its origins in the early 17th century. And you moved all the way through the 18th century, stopped in the 19th century to explore Italian and German opera, and then moved to an example of 21st century opera. So I thought it would be really interesting to compare multiple characteristics of opera. I'm going to move myself over here. So this is a document that I uploaded. It's just a table that outlines characteristics of opera, including type, style, singing genres, accompaniment, performers, plots, venues. For each of the primary types and styles of operas you explored. So for the Italian Baroque, I began by summarizing the Baroque style, moving into the singing, the 2 main singing genres of the Italian 17th century opera, recitative or recitative and aria. I often get questions about recitative and aria, and although I didn't receive any from you, I thought I would explain it, the difference in person. So primarily in terms of expression of plot, recitative moves the plot along, so that is why it is more of a dialogue. It's still sung, but it's dialogue that moves the plot along. Versus an aria is a moment where the plot halts for a second or a few minutes and is an expression of one particular emotion that a character is feeling. In terms of accompaniment for recitative versus aria, a recitative features sparse accompaniment. And this should make sense because you want to move the plot along. It's practical. You don't want to muddy the singing with a lot of accompaniment that might detract from the movement of the plot. Versus an aria will usually feature a fuller accompaniment, if not a full orchestra, which the definition of an orchestra depends on the century, of course. And this is because we want the orchestra to underline the emotion of the singer. If you have any questions about recitative and aria, please let me know if I need to upload any other videos. You also read about specific instrumental accompaniment in the Baroque, which featured the reading of figured bass notation performed by basso continuo. There are also ritornelli or instrumental interludes. The performers, you should have watched videos about castrati, the male performers who are castrated in order to preserve the high register of their voices. And venues were primarily elitist and for the upper courts. Your example was Monteverdi's Orfeo. I skipped over the 18th century, but I did note that 2 primary types of opera had started to form by the middle of the 18th century. So it was not only serious opera plots about mythology, but you could incorporate comic opera as well. And even by the 19th century, there's a fusion of serious operatic plots and comic opera plots. So you usually have funny moments in opera, but there might also be a more serious message in that opera. It's the Romantic style because it is the Romantic period which was introduced to you. Then we have, via your book, Monody continues in Italian 19th century opera, but we are going to also add choruses and larger ensemble numbers. So this is kind of a difference. This is why this chart is good. It outlines differences, how opera is changing over the centuries. The castrati fall out of fashion, and the tenor and soprano become the most important singers of 19th century Italian opera. Plots also change in accordance with the venues changing. So there's a catering to the middle class overall. So we are no longer going to feature plots that are unrelatable to a lower to middle class audience. Instead, we're going to feature political topics such as the Italian Risorgimento, this push for Italian unification in the 19th century. Personal relationships between, and these could be relationships between male and female figures in terms of sister-brother relationship, father-daughter relationship, or that of two lovers. Then there are adaptations from contemporary literature as well as adaptations from literature from the Renaissance, most notably Shakespeare. If we move into 19th century German opera, so the German opera of Wagner and Italian opera of Verdi, they're contemporaneous. They're happening at the same time, but they're very, very different. So we call Wagnerian opera music dramas. The style is still romantic, but he is going to focus specifically on this philosophy of Gesamtkunstwerk, a total, that's how you say that word, Gesamtkunstwerk. It's a total work of art, a synthesis of drama, your plot, your literary side, the visual side, as well as the aural side. The accompaniment is that of a larger orchestra, and performers, although they're labeled the same as what you would have in Italian opera, you would add kind of dramatic to that vocal type. So dramatic soprano, which just means that it's heavier. The range may be a little bit different from that you would sing for Italian opera. One main difference between Wagner and Verdi is that Wagner is trying to create an unending melody so there's no difference between recitative and aria anymore in German opera. He wants it to just be one main melody, and this melody is going to be unending. So of course the main melody is very different throughout, but he thinks of it as continuous. What I didn't include, and I totally forgot, I apologize for this, so I've added it here as well as on the Romantic Opera page as you're working on your final timeline project, is that Wagner actually created his own venue for his Gesamtkunstwerk and music dramas called the Festspielhaus, or the Festival Theater in Bayreuth, Germany. The Festspielhaus is really important because not only is it a way for Wagner to house his very special consideration of opera, but a lot of his innovations become staples for the consumption of Western art music into the 20th century. So he is the one who entirely covers the orchestra pit in a theatrical work. Other Wagnerian innovations, he widens the distance between the audience and the stage with the double proscenium arch so that the audience can focus directly on the drama on stage. He also dims the lights. So this is, if you've ever been to a classical music concert, and if you haven't, you will by the end of this 6-week semester, is that they usually will dim the lights and the audience will be sitting in the dark and the stage is what is lit. And that is just because it naturally draws our human eyes forward to the stage. So he's the first one to come up with that, as well as saying, shh, no talking. So something I guess that was not expressed in the Romantic opera side of this module is that at that time, you would have had audiences talking, eating. That was the tradition during opera. You would not have been quiet. This starts with Wagner. So the silencing of the audience so that they can focus explicitly on the drama unfolding on stage is Wagnerian. I also didn't compare Verdi and Wagner for you. Verdi, it's important to note that his orchestra is there to support the singers in a very simple way, whereas Wagner, as you read about, has these leitmotiven or a leitmotif that will basically take on a life of its own as separate from the singer. So Wagner begins to consider the orchestra as a character itself. All right, so going back up to our chart here, you had one more column, and that was of contemporary opera. So contemporary opera is a pretty huge topic, so I decided to focus specifically on postmodernism and minimalism of the turn of the 21st century. You'll note that in terms of our type, it could be a mix of serious and or comic opera. Postmodern and minimalism is just one type of style that you focused on with John Adams's Dr. Atomic. Monody may or may not be included. It usually is included and isn't as unending as a Wagnerian 19th century German opera. But you have choruses, ensemble numbers. The accompaniment may be a full orchestra or a very small chamber ensemble. It really depends what a composer has at his or her disposal. The traditional vocal types remain. There's a focus on contemporary subject matter, and often very, very contemporary subject matter. So you might have an opera covering events from 1 or 2 years past. So this is very interesting in terms of art, because how soon is too soon to begin creating art about something that's past, especially if it's still a sensitive subject matter. Opera houses still exist and house operas, but there are other venues to produce operas, such as university theaters or art museums or the outdoors. Composers and librettists and producers are becoming more and more innovative regarding the consumption of opera. That's actually what I would like you to think about as you conclude this unit. So I included this blurb of Opera Today. So as I say, what makes opera so interesting to me as a postmodern musicologist is that it questions itself, and it is currently redefining itself in a pretty rapid manner now that we're into the 2010s. So I want you to explore 3 websites or 3 case studies for me, and you don't have to turn anything in formally. This is just me tuning your critical thinking skills. I wonder, are these operas to you, these examples? You can disagree or agree with what the articles are saying. And then how does opera actually intersect with other multimedia genres, such as television or film, video games, the music video, YouTube? So the first case study is Todd Mackover's Death and the Powers. It's already 6 years old, but Todd Mackover works at MIT and is constantly reconsidering the role of technology in relation to Western art music. His students actually devised Guitar Hero, which we will be getting to next week, or sorry, Module 4. All right, the second case study is really exploring what is contemporary subject matter for opera today. What does that mean? So The Shining actually just premiered this month. It is based on Stephen King's The Shining, not so much on Kubrick's own film, also based on The Shining. And then at the end of this, there are other examples of contemporary subject matters from the end of the 20th century to today. So take a look at that. And then we have a composer who is rethinking the consumption of opera, especially with the advent of Netflix and Hulu in binge watching TV. So can you binge watch an opera? Is an opera that's televised still opera? So really questioning what is opera. So this is the spiritual biography of a witch's accuser. So that was the opera. I don't really have any review for film to type out, but I did want to explain diegetic versus non-diegetic music to you. So in person, because you have your film music report due on Sunday, June 5th. So what I mean by diegetic music, this is music that the characters are aware of within the narrative. So this is music that is performed within the plot. So say a string orchestra performing and the characters acknowledge that they hear it, or it's assumed that they hear it, or a radio playing in a car, right? So it's not just for the audience. Non-diegetic music, this is music that the audience is the only one who hears it. So the characters are unaware of it. Now, of course, in a postmodern work,